Welcome back. Now we are joined by Dr. Julia Rockenford. She is a lecturer, School of Law and Governance at Taylor's University in Malaysia and specializes in Middle East politics and international security. Welcome to the program, Dr. Julia. And the first question I would like to ask you, as you know that the fragile ceasefire, of course, currently holding as far as Iran-US conflict is concerned, where do you see we are heading at the moment? Of course, we are getting conflicting reports that there are good chances of diplomacy eventually succeeds, but then if we look at the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, then there are also fears of renewed hostilities. So how do you see the current situation?
I think since the start, quite a few people have said that it's unlikely that this ceasefire is going to hold. And it didn't look like that was a proper ceasefire because we had flare-ups here and there. Well, the situation in Lebanon has continued to escalate. It did not subside despite the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. And for Iran, it was a very significant moment, which considers Lebanese front as a part of any potential deal, or rather a precondition for cessation of hostilities. There were also attacks, exchanges of attacks here and there in the UAE. A couple of days ago, Iran struck off the oil facilities in Fujairah, in the UAE Emirate, and at the facility by the same name, as a response to the United States sending its destroyers to the Persian Gulf, coming too close within this so-called Project Freedom that Donald Trump has initiated, the one that didn't even last for 48 hours, so it was less than 2 days. And he probably had to cut it short because the Gulf countries told him that they are not going to provide the airspace and military bases. And they resumed that provision shortly after Trump announced that he is posing or putting an end to this Project Freedom, which ended having even really started. That probably was an attempt to resume the operation by the United States against Iran, but it didn't go that well. And now we're hearing more and more, I think there were some reports by CNN, by The Atlantic, that some sources close to the White House or within the White House, close to those who are in the know of what is to happen military-wise, they report that there is not much appetite for continuing this operation. Besides, Donald Trump is looking at the trip which was supposed to happen next week, his trip to Beijing to see President Xi, where he was expecting to come as an almost victor in this, and to be able to dictate his own terms to Xi, and for China to go easy, to loosen some of the limitations that it imposed, for example, on the export of rare earth minerals, something very critical for the United States, for Trump. That doesn't seem to be happening. We might even see the further postponement of that visit. It was already postponed once. Now might happen again. So now, the way I see it, there is maybe the strongest possibility of this conflict entering a suspended phase for a while there is this expectation of a response from Iran, which is not in a hurry to give that, so it doesn't feel that much under pressure that it needs to compromise.
But Dr. Julia, do you think, as you mentioned, that we are entering in a phase that where this conflict will be in a kind of a stalemate? But given that so much is at stake, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, or the way the Iranians are exercising their control and the counter moves by the US, do you think that the global economy can afford this kind of a stalemate?
Some actors in the global economy can. China is not as affected as probably the United States would want it to be affected as a result of that. And even if we go even further and look at it within a larger picture, as a move against China in perspective, not really Iran, starting just not from the Malacca Straits right ahead, but from the Strait of Hormuz, trying to choke China's oil imports, then it starts making sense. But China is not that constrained because it really got big on renewables within the past decade. Iran is also able to sustain. It's able to continue with the attacks. We've heard from Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi that against all the assessments, Iran is not down to 45 or 75% of its stockpiles of, for example, missiles, but it's up to 120% compared to the start of the war, and of course compared to the June war of the last year. The economy would continue to suffer globally. That the bargaining chips that Trump was planning to use as a leverage, again, during his meeting with Xi, but it seems to be going not so well for the United States itself. So it would be up to him to decide if he has to compromise, because indeed the global economy is suffering, and it's not even a distinction that we could make between the Middle East countries or African nations or us in South or Southeast Asia. At the same time, there is still not yet this concerted pressure on the U.S. administration to stop it and to, instead of trying to pressure Xi, to pressure Benjamin Netanyahu to stop the operations in Lebanon in the first place and then in Iran.
And who do you think at the current stage holds the edge? Because we also saw a report or attributed to some CIA input that Iran can sustain this US naval blockade for up to 3 months. So technically or essentially they are saying that the US does not have the kind of leverage that they can persuade either Iran to surrender or agree on a deal on the US terms. So in your view, who holds the sway in this battle between Iran and the US, both diplomatically and militarily?
Yes, you are right. Iran probably has an upper hand in this because it is able to still defend itself and retaliate against the attacks by the United States and Israel. Of course, its economy is not in a great shape. Officially, the inflation is at level of 50%, but unofficially, if you look at the prices, it's probably 200-300%. Still not at the rate of Venezuela, but to crush its economy completely. But nevertheless, the pressure is quite significant, and also supplies of essential goods like medicines, for example. So it's pretty tough. But at the same time, Iran is also capable in economic sense. It's still can support its economy by oil exports. It continues to do that despite some attacks at the Iranian oil tankers by the United States. The United States, in a way, the Trump administration, in a way, they shot themselves in the foot by going into this campaign, embarking into this campaign, because until now it was an intrigue that the United States could potentially start such an operation, but were prudently abstaining from it. So there was a threat which could have been used as a leverage. Now there is such a grand exposure of that the U.S. forces are not capable of continuing, of sustaining this warfare for over, 40 days, around 40 plus days. They had to stop, not only because of the War Power Resolution Act, but also because within the 60 days that they had to stop in order for Congress not to interfere and then potentially resume, but also because of the inability to sustain the hot war, and that's a big blow to the United States, to their reputation. So in all regards, you can say that Iran is holding an upper hand. China is also holding an upper hand as the actor who is behind the diplomatic process, together with Pakistan, and the one that keeps reminding all the players that they need to abide by the international law, in particular by the United Nations Charter.
Dr. Julia, many thanks indeed for joining us and giving your insights about the evolving situation between Iran and the United States. Well, now we have another guest from the United States, Atlanta, Georgia. We have senior U.S. journalist Eric Lemikol. Many thanks indeed, Mr. Eric, joining us on the Inside Foreign Affairs. So, what is the sense in the United States? It appears that there were conflicting reports. We were hearing that probably a diplomatic solution could be found of this Iran-US conflict, but then also we have had this, tension surrounding over the Strait of Hormuz. So, what is your sense where you are right now?
Yeah, so when we look at what has transpired in the last, let's say, 48 hours, we've had these minor incursions, and I'm going to call them minor because President Trump here in the United States is not looking at them any more than just a minor incursion. He's not even really saying it's a violation of the ceasefire, so that's a good thing. That shows me that President Trump is trying everything he can to not escalate tensions more than what they already are. So I see that as a positive light. Now, I think when it comes to the diplomacy between the United States and Iran via Pakistan and a little bit of Qatar, we really need to stop listening to what they're saying and looking at the actions that are happening. You have two very proud countries in Iran and the United States. They are going to saber rattle. So to listen to the rhetoric is probably going to be a miscarriage of justice between the two countries. I think we need to really look at and see what is actually happening. And what we're seeing is both sides are doing some little minor things. However, we're not seeing major escalations. And I think it's going to be important for the mediator countries like Pakistan to continue to insert themselves to make sure that these situations do not escalate further.
Eric, based on your analysis, does that mean that the chances of a potential understanding and agreement between Iran and the United States, mediated by Pakistan, is still a possibility and a great possibility?
I do think it's still a possibility. With what Iran says and with the actions going on with the mediation process compared to these little incursions in the Strait of Hormuz, it does still kind of give me the feel that maybe we're still not quite sure who's actually calling the shots in Iran, because we're seeing a lot of different behaviors come out of Iran. So, but I do think that we are inching closer to an agreement. We're not seeing Iran really do much. They did fire on UAE over the last 48 hours, so that's a little concerning. I would like to not see Iran fire on their neighbors during the ceasefire. So I think it's yet to be determined, but I do think that we are inching closer to a ceasefire still.
Eric, you pointed out that the one dilemma within the United States is that who is calling the shots in Tehran. But interestingly, some U.S. intelligence reports indicate that the Iran Supreme Leader, Mujtaba Khamenei, continues to play a central role in both negotiations and war strategy. And this is quite contrasting to earlier assessments that even people within the U.S. were skeptical that whether the new Iranian Supreme Leader was alive or not, or whether he was even capable to take all those decisions. But suddenly this new assessment. So what do you make of it? It appears that in this case, U.S. intelligence community feels that the Iran Supreme Leader is the one who is calling the shot, both as far as war or diplomacy is concerned.
Yeah, so it is in contrary to what President Trump was earlier reporting. I think as maybe a premeditated a bit of intelligence that he had that the Ayatollah was potentially deceased. At least he was very almost fatally maimed. So now we are hearing from, I think, what we would consider verified intelligence that the Ayatollah is actually participating in these peace talks, participating in the military aspect of things again. So that does get us closer to really narrowing down who the power broker of Iran is. So I think, and in that sense, that's good, because if the Ayatollah is inching towards a peace deal, that's a good sign for everybody involved. So I'm pretty optimistic about that, and I am glad that we are starting to see some sort of leadership emerge from Iran to kind of navigate them through this.
Recent polls in the U.S. suggested that this Iran war appears to be becoming quite unpopular in the U.S. and there is tremendous pressure on the U.S. government there. Do you think that this can play a huge role given the midterms and all the domestic politics? Because often you cannot disassociate yourself or distance yourself from the domestic agenda and the domestic politics.
Right. Yeah, so you're exactly right. We are on a time clock here in the United States with midterms coming up. President Trump has an entire agenda for the political party moving forward. So, Republicans want this war to conclude. That most of the candidates that are Trump-backed candidates did do well in their primaries. So Trump did gain a lot of support in the primary process, but that was against other Republicans. Now, going against Democrats in the midterm election, he could face a little bit more scrutiny. His Trump-backed candidates. So this is an issue that we are seeing on the Republican side of things here. I do think that President Trump is starting to urge for this to conclude. The midterm elections we're looking at November, so we're getting closer. And obviously, I think President Trump wants to conclude this as soon as possible so he can allow the markets to recover, and it'll increase his odds of his candidates keeping their seats or gaining seats in the House and Senate.
Eric Lamcole, many thanks indeed for joining us and giving the perspective from the U.S. about this Iran-U.S. conflict. Now, moving on to another key story of the week. This week marks the first anniversary of the Pakistan-India conflict of May 2025. Following the Pahalgam attack, India launched the so-called Operation Sindoor, claiming it was targeting terrorist hideouts inside Pakistan. Islamabad offered an independent investigation into the incident, but New Delhi rejected the proposal. Then, on the night of May 6, the BJP government, without presenting any concrete evidence, carried out missile strikes inside Pakistan. What followed was one of the most intense aerial confrontation in modern history. More than 100 fighter jets from both sides took to the skies, engaging in beyond visual range combat. Within minutes of the Indian strikes, Pakistani Air Force shot down several Indian aircraft, including the highly sophisticated French-made Rafale jets. That alone became global headlines because the downing of advanced fighter aircraft is always a major story. But perhaps the bigger story was something else: how Pakistan withstood Indian military pressure despite enormous odds. Before the conflict began, there was widespread skepticism over whether Pakistan, facing political, economic, and security challenges, could effectively respond to a country with a defense budget nearly 10 times larger. The Modi government appeared convinced that it could establish a new normal, carrying out cross-border strikes at will without expecting a meaningful response from Pakistan. But the events of May 2025 turned that assumption on its head. Pakistan emerged from the four-day conflict with renewed confidence, while India faced diplomatic and military setbacks. The conflict also became one of the reasons behind Pakistan's growing closeness with the Trump administration. It is often said that President Donald Trump admires strength, decisive leadership, and Pakistan's performance during the confrontation elevated Islamabad's standing in Washington. Since then, Pakistan's geostrategic profile has continued to rise. Today, on one hand, Islamabad is mediating between Iran and the United States, while on the other, it is expanding defense cooperation with key regional players and exploring new strategic alignments. Ironically, India sought Pakistan's diplomatic isolation, but the outcome appears to have been quite the opposite. In diplomacy, countries often rely on ambiguity and strategic deception to keep adversaries uncertain. But under the BJP government, India's approach has become increasingly predictable. And predictability in geopolitics can become a weakness. So as Pakistan observes the first anniversary of the conflict, many here believe one conclusion stands out. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's gamble ended up giving Pakistan an unexpected opportunity to test its military capabilities, strengthen its strategic relevance, and raise its profile on the global stage. That's it from tonight's Inside Foreign Affairs. Do join us next week.